Hey, welcome back to the podcast. So, we are talking about cycle tracking today. I wanted to do this episode. It'll probably be a pretty short one, but I wanted to cover this as a singular topic because, yes, it comes into play when we're talking about the menstrual cycle phases. That's absolutely a part of it. We could also talk about it when we talk about fertility. We could talk about it when we get into Dutch testing because things have to be timed correctly in order for the Dutch test to be accurate. But I wanted this to live as its own episode because, for various different reasons, being able to accurately track your cycle is very important. So, I know one of the first questions that comes up when we talk about tracking is what app can I use for this? What app is the best? And I'm going to be honest with you guys. There are multitude of options when it comes to tracking your cycle. I have not used all of them. I cannot speak to the validity of all of them. I can only share my experience that I have had with the apps that I have used. And I'll share a couple of those in a minute. But I want to stress the importance of actually taking time to manually track these things that we're going to talk about today. Um, I think that when you do that, you're not relying on the intelligence of an app to tell you what's going to happen. When you're having to manually track it and you're really dialed in with what's going on, then you are automatically more in tune with your body and you're learning more about your own body and your own patterns because you're the one that's having to pay attention to it a little closer and you're the one that's having to manually, like count out the days on a calendar of when, XYZ thing is going to happen. I know that that's not sustainable. I know it's not desirable to do it that way. Um, and you may never do it that way, and that's okay. But take this as your nudge to, even when you're using the apps, to not just rely and trust what it's telling you, be invested enough in the process and get in tune with your body enough with these things we're going to talk about today that you can be like, you know what? I know that this app is telling me, say, that I'm going to ovulate 3 days from now, but I'm really tuned into my body and I know how I feel leading up to ovulation, and I just don't feel that way. I think the app is wrong. For whatever reason, my ovulation is going to be a little bit later this month. It's very important to understand and know those things about yourself, both when you're trying to get pregnant and when you're trying to not get pregnant. Okay. The other thing that I will say in terms of apps and what to look for in an app, you want an app or a device that's going to learn you and your patterns and your normals and make adapted predictions based on that. You do not want to use an app that has been like created and formatted in a way that it believes everyone has a standard 28-day cycle, because we know that that's not true. And if you do that and you're someone that has like a 32, 35-day cycle, then that app is always going to be wrong. If it is not learning that about you and it's not adapting to you in that way to base your predictive days off of, like when you're going to start your period, when you're going to ovulate, those metrics, if it is just solely basing things off of a standard 28-day cycle, then for you, every single month it's going to be wrong. And that can lead to either a lot of frustration when you're trying to get pregnant because you think you're going to ovulate on a certain day, but in reality, you're not. You're ovulating on a different day. So then you're timing your intercourse wrong. Could also lead to you accidentally getting pregnant when you don't want to be pregnant. If you're really heavily reliant on just that app telling you what's going to happen. Now, technology has come a long way. There is, artificial intelligence in the background of these apps that's learning you, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them, that's learning you, learning your patterns, learning your cycle. And it will even, a lot of them ask you when you're setting up the app or your account for the very first time, when was your last period? How long does your period typically last? How long between your periods do you typically go? And the more accurate that you can put that information in there and then continue to consistently log what's going on, the more accurate it's going to be with its predictability. Okay, so to touch on some apps and which apps I've used in the past. Prior to my first pregnancy, so this was like 6 years ago, I used Flow. I had a good experience with it. I liked it. I had just a free version. I think there is maybe a paid version of it. It did learn, my cycle and adapt to that. So I liked that about it. I don't remember a whole lot else about the app. Ever since then, since I got an Apple Watch, I have been using Apple Health to track my cycles until just recently, and I'll get to that in just a second. I really like what Apple Health has to offer. It does pair well with, my watch. I have the watch that says, it can like observe changes in body temperature, and I do wear my watch to bed at night most nights. So, and it also is adaptable. It knows that I don't have a standard 28-day cycle. And I feel that it is pretty accurate in its predictions. Now, I've also been tracking in there in that same app consistently for about 5 years now. So it has a lot of data to work with and go off of. I also like in the Apple Health app and other apps as well. Something that I definitely encourage you to look for is the ability to chart and document other things outside of just, yes, I bled today. No, I didn't. You want the ability to be able to put things like your BBT, your basal body temperature, your cervical mucus. Those two are going to be huge. But then you also want to be able to track things like mood changes, maybe acne, libido, bloating, GI symptoms. Those are kind of the big ones that come to mind. But the more information that you can kind of document together in one place as it relates to your cycle, it's going to help you connect more dots and be able to more accurately predict what is going to happen in the future. So, as I mentioned, I recently, in the last few months, I wish I could remember what month exactly I started in, maybe October. I started using the Mira at-home hormone testing, and I am obsessed with it. I'm a big data person. I love to see data. I love to have actual numbers to base things off of, and I think that Mira is fantabulous. Now, there is the ability to track things inside the Mira app without doing the testing ones. So Mira, to back up for just a second, is the at-home testing for hormones that I like to use with my clients. With the wands that I recommend and that I order for my clients, you can test estrogen, progesterone, LH, and FSH. And if you're just like super interested in that, I did record a whole podcast episode just on that. So that's back in episode 81 because I don't want to get lost in the weeds of that today. But you have the ability in the app to track even on days when you're not performing a test, and it asks all the things. It will let me put in there how my appetite was, my activity level, how my skin was, my mood, my basal body temperature. Did I do a workout that day? Then it asks about, for your days of menstrual flow, if you had any spotting, your libido, if you had intercourse. There's a section for cervical mucus. And then there's some other things in there that I don't typically use. But I feel that it's very comprehensive. And again, it has learning technology built into it. It was very specific in the questions that it asked me when I was setting up my account. How many days on your period do you typically bleed? When was your last period? How long do they typically last? Like, it asks all of the things. And then of course it has some enhanced learning capabilities and predictability because it is monitoring your literal hormones in real time. So it makes fluctuations and new predictions based off of that. So that's my current favorite way to track. You can set up the app without having any of the testing ones, and you could just use their other features. I'm not saying necessarily that that's necessary because you have a bunch of other options, but it is my favorite place to be able to comprehensively look at things. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say on the tracking apps. Now, I really want to get into kind of the meat of what I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to give you some tips and information on really what it is that you want to be paying very close attention to when you are going to track your cycle. So, of course, the first thing that we need to tackle is your period. When did bleeding begin? And the reason that I call this out is because for a lot of us, we start our period with a day or maybe a couple of days of spotting. That is not technically the first day of your menstrual cycle. Your first day, day one of your cycle, is the first day that you have flow. So it's important to chart that, document that correctly. So I wanted to call that out. Then it's also important to accurately chart the number of days that you bleed. And then, of course, you're going to pick back up your charting with your next, bleed in terms of that. You want to make note along the way of any days that you had any spotting. Now, the first sign, symptom, body change that you could, I don't know what the word, I couldn't decide on what word I wanted to use there. The first part of your anatomy you could assess and chart with for tracking like ovulation would be the position of your cervix. And I want to talk about this one first because I think that there's probably going to be a lot of resistance and a lot of people, they're like, I'm not doing that. I don't blame you. This is one that, to be honest with you, I don't check super often because I haven't really felt the need to. I feel like observing the other two areas that we're going to talk about in a second are plenty for me to know where I'm at in my cycle. But I wanted to give this piece of education because if for no other reason, it's just really interesting and cool to know that this is like how our body works. And it's likely the first time some of you guys are ever going to hear this or know that this change even goes on inside your body based on where you're at in your cycle. So, first of all, if you didn't know, your cervix changes positioning and firmness based on where you're at in your cycle. So, in your follicular phase, which if you need a refresher on these phases, I also don't want to get lost in the weeds of that in this episode today. I did a full episode on that. It was episode 87. So just click back a few and get that refresher there. During your follicular phase, your cervix is gradually going to rise. It's going to get higher and it's going to be softer. Then around ovulation, that cervix is going to be at its highest point and it's going to be its softest. Then when you hit the luteal phase, the cervix is going to begin to lower and it's going to get really firm and close. Again, I know that a lot of people are going to be like, I am not checking the position of my cervix every day, just not doing it, not doing it. Totally fine. Again, this is one that I do not necessarily check often for myself. But now, like once I learned this several years ago, because it was something that was like brand new information to me in my 20s as well, that this was even going on, I did pick up on the fact that like at certain points, things with intercourse would feel a little different in the same positions that they did like, a week ago. And I have come to realize that that is because the position of my cervix is different. So that might just be like a puzzle piece that you put together. Keep that in your back pocket. I'm not telling you have to check the position of your cervix every day. By any means, that is something that you can chart on some tracking apps, though. That is one of the things that they teach you when you're going through like a FAM a fertility awareness method course or class, that is one of the things that they teach you to check. That's where I learned it the very first time. Okay, then I want to talk about basal body temperature. This is really important, and it's so simple to do. Big misconception. People hear basal body temperature and they know a little bit about it, and they know that it's like associated with fertility and your cycle. And people think that that a basal body temperature is your temperature in your vagina, and it's not. So if you thought that, you're definitely not alone. I'll admit that years ago I thought that as well, or I wondered that. I'm like, what? I wonder if that's the temperature in the vagina, or is that just a regular temperature? You're taking a normal temperature. You're just taking your temperature in your mouth, but it is the timing of when you're taking your temperature that really matters here. And there's some arguability, I don't know if that's the right word. I might have just made that up, about the thermometer that you use. Now, I have personally experimented with this, and I have found basal body temperature tracking to be just as effective with the $9 thermometer that I got at the Walgreens that only reads to I guess it's the hundredth place. If you if you looked up the definition of basal body temperature or how to accurately collect basal body temperature, they're going to tell you that you need a thermometer that reads to the 10th, I think it's the 10th place. That feels really hard for me today to determine those for some reason. I don't know why. I swear I do normally know that. You want a thermometer that reads like 0.2 numbers instead of traditionally thermometers are just like, 98.3. You would want one that would be like 98.32. However, like I said, I've experimented with this. I now have both types of thermometers, and I don't really see that much of a difference. But for some people, they do. There's a reason they make that recommendation. Okay. I feel like I'm getting off on a tangent. The way that you take your basal body temperature and the when, as far as you want to take it, I like to be in the habit of doing this every single day. You really only have to do it leading up to ovulation and to confirm that ovulation has happened, because what you're going to see is that typically your temperature before ovulation is going to fall somewhere between like 97 and 97.7, somewhere in there. Then after you ovulate, you're going to see a 0.5 or so increase in your temperature. However, just for like keeping it a habit and not forgetting to do it, I like to just take it every single morning. And then that way it's easy for me to remember. I put it into my chart. I've got that data. It's also like just knowing what your baseline temperature is good for other things. Like it can kind of clue you in on when you might be starting to get sick. It can clue you in on some metabolism type things. I think it's a valuable measure every day, not just Sundays. But that's the thing. So you want to take the temperature as soon as you wake up in the morning. I keep mine on my little nightstand beside my bed. I literally wake up and I reach over and I get my thermometer and it goes in my mouth. You want to make sure that you have slept at least 4 hours consecutively and that you are taking your temperature as the very first thing that you do in the morning. The reason for this is if you wake up and you start doing a lot of talking, or you get up and you walk to the bathroom and you walk to the kitchen, then this movement and things that you're doing is naturally going to raise your body temperature. When you have been asleep at rest, there isn't really anything else that has influenced your temperature during that time. And that's just like a way to keep it consistent and accurate over time. You also want to try to do it about the same time every day. And then again, you want to chart it somewhere. You want to be able to see that, your temperatures were pretty consistent. And then, oh, there was a raise, and what's going to happen is you're going to ovulate, you're going to see the temperature rise. The temperature is going to remain raised until you start your period again, and then it'll return to whatever your baseline is. So, for example, my temperature typically is 97.7. After I ovulate, I'll see 97.9 or 98.3 or so, and it will stay that way until like the day I start my period. The next day, I'll go back to being 97.7. And I've learned that about myself because I've consistently done this over time. You will learn what is normal for you. Okay, last thing that I want to talk about, indicator of fertility, thing to watch for around ovulation is the changes in your cervical mucus. And I think this is another thing that freaks some people out because they think that they're going to have to be like touching themselves and like, I don't know, like trying to collect some of this mucus. Number one, you should be comfortable touching your own body, but that's a different conversation for a different day. This can be observed just by what is in your underwear and how things feel when you wipe when you've gone to the bathroom. So, pre-ovulation, towards the like second half of your follicular phase, as your body is like preparing for ovulation, you're going to notice that you do have more discharge. And it's kind of that creamy, little bit sticky, not like a yeast infection, just normal discharge. Right before and right when ovulation occurs, that is when you'll see this shift, and that mucus, the cervical mucus, will become really slick, slippery, clear, like an egg white type of texture. And if you're not seeing it on your underwear, sometimes, when you go to wipe after you've used the bathroom, you will notice that there's either like a lot of it on the toilet paper, it will feel very slick. Anyway, then post ovulation, so after you've kind of been fertile for the month, as those progesterone levels continue to rise, your cervical mucus is going to get a little thicker and sticky again, and then it's going to kind of dry up, and you will be dry and not have a lot of discharge at all through the end of your luteal phase, and then after your period has ended until you get into those few days before ovulation. And that is another thing that I definitely think is important for you to be able to track in whatever tracking system you're using, whether that's on paper, old school, or it's inside an app, because it's a very informative. And once you kind of get that stuck in your brain and you understand it, I think that is one of the easiest ways for you to just be in tune with your body, because it's something that we're having to see and almost having to assess when we wipe naturally, like without us even having to do anything extra. It's right there in our face every time we pull our pants down. I think it's just, it's an easy thing to add into your routine without having to change your routines. So I hope that this episode has been helpful. I hope that that maybe clues you in on some of the ways to make sure that what you're tracking is appropriate and that it is actually helpful and actually the data that you want to capture. If you are curious about how you can get my help learning how to track your cycle, or maybe you just have maybe there's some really wonky things going on with your cycle and you're like, I'm tracking, but the tracking ain't adding up. It ain't making no sense. That's one of the things that I can help you do when we work together. So in the show notes, there's always the link to book a no cost 20-minute happy hormone clarity call with me. We can talk a little bit about what you've got going on, and then I'll make some recommendations based on where you're at, what your budget is, and all the things. So hop on my calendar over the next couple of weeks, and I'll talk to you guys next week for another episode.